All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
No microphone or anything. So I'm going to be talking about the early communication indicator, which is a measure of children's expressive communication, infants and toddlers, and talk a little bit about the ECI, how we've used it in a randomized control trial to show how using data from the ECI can help inform intervention practices, and then talk about how we're currently, we've got a grant right now to adapt the ECI for use with children who've been diagnosed with autism. So first of all, I am one small part of a very big team here on the KU side. So there's two teams, one at KU and one at University of North Carolina. And everybody is a huge contributor to this. Most of the people on the KU side are specific to the early communication indicator and developing the ECI and the psychometric properties related to that. The UNC group has a lot of expertise in autism, and they're helping us adapt it and identify some key skill elements that would fit into the ECI for measuring growth for children with autism. At our last team meeting with the UNC group, we had some interesting data to look at related to some basketball game that happened. But so you can see this cumulative record of points here. There was an intervention at halftime where they used data to, for the blue team here. I'm just using acronyms here, so hopefully you don't recognize what teams those are. But you can see that data-driven decision making made a difference here, and that blue team that looked kind of dead for a while actually improved. So, yeah, interesting meeting this week. So for the next few minutes, like I said, talking about the ECI and going to be talking about its effects when used to inform intervention decision making. So one of the key aspects of the ECI is that it's something that's designed to be used by practitioners, even by parents in some cases, who have very limited training in assessments. So a lot of times we have these really comprehensive assessments that take an hour, 45 minutes to administer. It takes real specialized skills in order to score those assessments. And if you guys are familiar with Stan Dino's work in general outcome measures, the idea is rather than taking just a snapshot in time of a child's progress in a moment in time, is to be able to measure frequently. Just like in BCBAs who take frequent assessments of children's behavior on a specific key skill. The idea of IGDs, the ECI is an IGD, and the idea of that is to look at a general outcome, but just like we do with best practices in behavior analysis, in taking frequent measurement and being able to see quickly if an intervention is making a difference, and if it's not making a difference, make some changes, make some data-driven changes. We can also show growth over time. So again, rather than just one snapshot, we can see if a child is growing. We can see if their growth matches or is less or greater than what we would expect from the general population. And again, since we're really wanting these to be used by practitioners, they need to be easy to score, easy to administer. And really key to this is that the results can be interpreted. That's something that I think psychometricians really forget a lot of times, is being able to interpret data. So you've got a data set, you've got a table full of numbers. You want that to be able to be interpreted not only by the person who's maybe trying to make a diagnosis or put it into a database to share a state report or a program report. But in order to make decisions, we need to be able to interpret that and not only show, okay, this child's making growth, they're not making growth, but what can we do about it? What actionable decisions can we make in order to in order to show growth and encourage growth if we're not seeing it? Okay, so what is the ECI? So early communication indicator, 6 minutes, is designed for children who are 6 to 42 months of age. It's a measure of expressive communication. So we're not looking at all aspects of communication here. I'll show you the key skill elements in a little bit. They're benchmarked for children 6 to 42 months of age. I've got a link here that shows an example of an ECI administration, but it's not working right now. The browser is not allowing me to show that, but basically this is a picture of the assessment right here, and you have a parent or some other adult who's familiar with the child. That's key. The play partner does not necessarily have to be certified and trained on the ECI. There's about a 12-item administration checklist that they do need to follow. Really key to that play partner's role in this 6-minute assessment is to be engaging with the child, to comment and label about what the child is doing, basically modeling communication. Whether the child is speaking in complete phrases or words, just responding to that child and also following that child's lead during that 6 minutes. So for an infant or toddler, 6 minutes can be a long time to do any one thing, as you guys know. And so it's really important to make sure that that 6-minute assessment is engaging so that you can keep that child engaged. And during that 6 minutes, a trained assessor, either live or watching a video, is going to be scoring these 4 key skill elements. So the general outcome of the ECI is how that child uses nonverbal and verbal communication to express their wants and needs. And that goes from pre-linguistic communication to spoken language. And we've broken those up into these 4 key skill elements. I'm not going to go too much in depth into the scoring definitions, but gestures is basically any movement that the child makes that is communicative in nature. And we have some examples of those, handing a toy to the play partner, waving. The next part of that is vocalizations, and that's basically any sound that the child makes that is not that's not a burp or a sneeze or a cough. It does not have to necessarily be directed to the play partner. Any sound that the child makes. Single words, those are any single word that the child makes that's not paired with another word within about 2 seconds or so. And then multiple words are just those phrases. Those are the most advanced key skills that we're measuring on the ECI. Any words, phrases that the child makes. And again, they don't necessarily have to be directed to the play partner. None of those do. And those are combined into a total weighted communication score. And that score is, we call it weighted because we do give more weight to the single words and multiple words than we do the gestures and vocalizations. And the reason for that is because we want to be able to see continued growth. And let me show you what these growth patterns look for each one of these, what they look like for each key skill element. So gestures, relatively flat. You see a little bit of a bump up until 18 months, and then it decreases. The more interesting one is vocalizations, where you see a large bump and an increase at 18 months, and then you see a decrease. And this is kind of related to that reason why we need to weight that total score, because you do see a decrease in vocalizations, but that's expected because why? We see vocalizations start to turn into words. So that's one of the key reasons that vocalizations are going down, single words are going up, because the child is starting to form those vocalizations into words. And as you can see, single words starts to go down around 33, 34 months. That child is using multiple words. That's the way we have conversations. Very little of what we say in language is a single word. And so we want to see those multiple words going up. And as you can see, they continue to go up. And this green line is that weighted total communication score. And that's why we see that continued growth from 6 months to 42 months. And what you're seeing here is, and this kind of gets into that data interpretation thing, really important to be able to interpret data. You're seeing child scores overlaid on those benchmark performances. So you can see for this child, started, so that first dotted line is 1 standard deviation below benchmark. The next line is 1.5 standard deviations below benchmark. You can see this child's first assessment, right around that benchmark score. They started to go down, an intervention was put in place. This blue line, which is calculated within the data system, this is generated in our online data system. You can see that growth is on average going down. And the important part of getting this growth line in here is because you do see variability with the ECI. And it may not be related, honestly, to that child's actual language proficiency, which is another reason why you need to do repeated assessments, because the child may, for whatever reason, just be quiet one day. Maybe the play partner is a little less engaged. There's going to be a lot of other factors involved with that. And so if you have an average rate of growth, you can see this child is decreasing growth, which is not something we want to see. So an intervention put in place, and then again, you can see the child responded and there was a strong average rate of growth, but it didn't happen immediately. One other thing I'll say about this in terms of interpretation is that our system also will compare this growth rate to the average or the benchmark growth rate. So the benchmark growth rate is about 0.99 communications per month. And the system will generate this slope line and it will say, visually, I think you can tell that this child's growth, if they continue this, is either about matching that benchmark growth or we'll be able to meet that over time. So a few different ways that you can interpret that, but there's a lot going on there. And so what we've done within our data system is we've given some additional support for being able to not only interpret the data, but to be able to make actionable decisions about what should be done for a child who's performing below benchmark. And so within the data system, we built the what's called the Making Online Decisions system, and it uses David Tilley's problem-solving model to basically look at a child's data, see if it's below benchmark, and make recommendations based on that child's performance on those individual key skill elements. So, doing quarterly assessments with a child who's performing at or above benchmark, the system first looks to see if that child is below benchmark, at least 1 standard deviation or 1.5 standard deviations below. If they are, then the mod will just present a few questions to that person who's entering the data to ask them, why do you think this child might be performing below benchmark? These are just really general questions. Do you think there's a medical problem? Has there been a recent change in family life for the child? Has there been a change in the center, if they're going to a center? So that gets documented. And then the system identifies some strategies that the parents could use at home. These are evidence-based strategies. So they are Dale Walker's promoted communication strategies. These are very simple strategies for parents to use to encourage their child to use more language. They encourage more parent-child interactions following a child's lead, how to engage with a child during daily routines. There's a manual related to this. And so rather than just taking that manual and handing it to the parent, the idea is the mod is going to look at that child's performance on individual key skill elements and pick a few strategies that parent could use that would support that child's growth in some specific areas on the ECI. The real key to this, and what we found in our research, is the active ingredient in the mod is right here. So we've identified the strategies. You can present those strategies and you can show them to and I'll talk in a minute about who we've used this with, but home visitors, for example, you can present those strategies, but if they're not actually taking those to the parents, working with the parents on how to use those strategies and how to implement them with their child, then we're not going to see change in the parent's behavior, which in turn we're not going to see growth on the ECI. The final part of the mod is that it analyzes the child's performance after about 3 more ECI assessments and reports on whether or not there's been some noticeable change and further recommendations. And as that child's performance on the ECI changes, so now maybe they are starting to use single words, whereas they weren't before, and now they're a little low on multiple words, it's going to recommend strategies for advancing multiple word use. So again, this is just kind of the screenshots of what the mod looks like. The first question is, was this a valid assessment? So as you can imagine, a lot of times this is a play-based assessment done in homes, maybe centers, maybe some chaotic classrooms. So we want to make sure that this was a valid assessment. The child was engaged. More importantly, the parent or the play partner was engaged. There weren't distractions. You know, if you do this in a classroom with a lot of other children, you've got a teacher one-on-one with a child playing with a barn or a house. Guess what? There's a lot of children there that say, that looks pretty fun. And they're gonna come get engaged with that. And that can't happen with the ECI. That would not be a valid ECI assessment. So once that's entered, then you can answer different questions for the mod. You can access the suggested strategies, and this is what that looks like. So once they've gotten to the point, they've answered those 3 questions, after about 3 minutes, you get to this point where the mod has actually recommended some strategies. So they can click on these strategies, see what they look like. And a really important part of this is the home visitor or the teacher who's working with the child who's doing these assessments, or any other practitioner, they know more about that family than this mod system does. All the mod knows is how that child's performing on those key skill elements. And so it's really important to give them several strategies. Let the home visitor or the educator pick some that they think that the parent would be most likely to use. So it's a really important aspect to be able to get some buy-in from those home visitors and parents. And again, once they've seen those strategies, most important part of that is to prompt them, whether it's the home visitor or the educator, to remember to continue working with the parent on how to make sure that those can be implemented within their daily routines, whether that's bathing, playtime, reading, or laundry. The idea is just to embed these. These aren't, pull out intervention strategies. These are things that should be embedded in daily routines. And as you guys can tell, this is not an intensive intervention recommendation. So the idea is that we're catching children, as they're performing below benchmark, and just giving them a little bit of a boost to make sure that this, if you think of like a 3-tiered approach, MTSS, this is basically the universal tier 1. This is what all children should be getting. So let's make sure that that's happening before we make a recommendation for additional services. Okay, so real quick on a randomized control trial that we did with this mod system. We had 13 early Head Start programs from 4 different states. I know you guys know where these states are. That's not why I put the map up here. The reason I put the map up here is to show you kind of the reach of this. These are home visitors. And if you think about what home visiting looks like, it's different from center-based. In a center-based classroom, you've got known variables, you've got teachers with maybe some known experience and professional development. If you look at these circles, that's how far these home visitors are traveling across these various states to basically go into, what I like to consider individual classrooms. Each one of these homes represents kind of a classroom. And the teachers are the parents who have, a vast range of experience. So these were the early Head Start centers that we worked with. That's how far their families live. 214 families, children 6 to 36 months of age. We randomly assigned some home visitors to use the ECI, use those evidence-based promoting communication strategies. They had access to all of that. The only difference with the mod group was that they had access to the mod recommendations. So our comparison group was still able to do the ECI. They did the ECI, but they were on their own in terms of interpreting the data and determining what children maybe need those PC talk strategies. These are the measures that we use. Obviously, the ECI, the PLS 5th edition, and parents' use of the promoting communication strategies. The research questions I'm going to talk about just in the next couple of slides are: do the children whose home visitors use the mod show stronger growth on the ECI, and were these effects also seen on the PLS? So for the ECI growth, so just like the graphs we were looking at before, this is time along the horizontal axis, and then on the vertical axis, you've got their ECI score. So at baseline, before children fell below benchmark and were eligible for either mod or self-guided strategies, this is what baseline looked like across 3 different mod groups. And we've got these mod groups separated based on how far their home visitor made it through the mod. So basically with what degree of fidelity they actually used the mod. The black line is the self-guided group. So not a big difference between those groups before then. The good news is all of these children showed growth. These are early Head Start programs, and I love talking about this because you often aren't able to see the effects of something like early Head Start unless you do a study like this. And without our intervention, these children are showing a lot of growth. I mean, that is the significant difference between the intervention condition and the and baseline. So that's great. With the folks who used the whole mod, so that active ingredient of actually following up with the parents, filling out checklists, indicating what they were doing with the parents, indicating that they were coaching the parents on their use of the strategies, you can see their children obviously grew a lot more on the ECI. That difference is also seen. I won't go too deep into the stats on this, but what we saw were big differences in not only the raw scores on the PLS, but also the standard scores on the PLS. And that those differences were maintained 12 months after intervention. Now, and I'm not showing this right now, but we also, what do you guys think? Do you think we saw a difference in how much the parents use the strategies as well? Yeah, so we did independent observations of parents' use of the strategies in their homes during daily routines. And that was actually the mediator of these effects, was whether or not parents were actually using those strategies. And I don't know, to me, it's just really cool because you've got, you've got a home visitor who's entering data into a data system. They're getting recommendations. They've got to do the work of getting that information to the parents. And then the parents have to take that information and integrate it into their practices with their child. And then that leads to those effects with the, it's just a really kind of a distal, it's a long way from these mod strategies to seeing growth on the ECI, which I think is pretty cool and really good for the home visitors who are doing this work. So we see that the ECI can be used to show growth, and it can be used to monitor children's growth. What we have seen before we started this project was a lot of the folks. So the ECI is used in about 23, 24 states around the country. It's been used with about 40,000 children. So I wouldn't say it's as widely used as a lot of measures, but a lot of folks are using it. And what we hear a lot of times is even children as young as 12 months old, 6 months old, they're seeing indicators of autism, and they want some way to better measure that. We have reports from folks who say, well, I've got a child, for example, who's, their preferred thing is a cow. So whenever you bring that barn out, we're getting a lot of vocalizations, and we get a lot of the word cow. And so by the scoring definitions of the ECI, you score that as a single word every time they say it. And that child's single words were just off the chart, and so their weighted total communication score was within range. But we know that child is only saying one word. So sometimes they would make modifications. Say, okay, I'm going to score that one time, but if they say it again, they make notes in the system to make sure that it's clear that they made some modifications. But we really wanted to be able to develop something that would be useful for folks that are working with kids with autism. And so we've got an NIH grant right now to address these three aims. Number one, adapt it so that it'll be better suited for children with an autism diagnosis. And then do some validation studies to validate it. What we're doing right now in our most recent data, number one, what really, I talk kind of as an anecdote about what a child with autism, they look like on the ECI, but we've also been able to go into the Med Center's autism registry, and children, throughout Kansas City and Kansas, a lot of children have gotten the ECI, and so we were able to identify children within the registry who also had ECI data, specifically 23 children. And so not a huge sample, who either had autism at the time or would go on to get an autism diagnosis. And so you can see differences in these key skill elements. So gestures, not a big difference, but you are seeing a decrease over time. Vocalizations, I think, is the most interesting one, because where we're expecting, like I talked about earlier, you expect to see a decrease in vocalizations. We tend to see children with autism, their vocalizations increase over time. And as you would expect with multiple words and single words, particularly with multiple words, they start later and they grow slower. Those are significant differences in those slopes for single words and multiple words. We also did find that autism severity, as measured by the CARS, was correlated with lower growth on the ECI. We did not see gender differences, and we did not see differences based on cognitive ability, based on the Bailey measure. So again, and you can start to think that we're we could possibly even develop a profile. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to say that, a child with autism, this is what they look like on the ECI. What we're really trying to do is get some evidence and some information about how we can adapt this to better monitor progress of children who have autism, so we can measure the effects of intervention over time. So a key thing that we've done right now is we're integrating probes of initiated joint attention into the ECI, and so there's a lot of things that I'm sure you guys can imagine that you need to consider when doing an ECI, a play-based assessment with a child with autism. And we chose initiated joint attention because that's something that we know children with autism typically don't have trouble displaying. And so we want to measure that over time, and a lot of interventions have that as an outcome target. So this is our definition of initiated joint attention. And the key here is that, with the way the ECI is currently set up, it's a play-based assessment. There's not individual items. It's not structured, so to speak, in any way. So what we really need to do in order to try to elicit some initiated joint attention was to insert some probes to try to elicit that child's joint attention. We also added a communication rating during these probe sessions. So basically a probe session and we're trying to determine whether or not it should be at the beginning or the end of the ECI, or actually embedded into the ECI. That's our second pilot test right now. But what we're also doing is during that probe session, since we're not really measuring, particularly if we're doing this before or after the ECI, we're not counting key skill elements. So we do want to get some measure of that child's communication during that probe session. So our pilot one, which we recently completed, we had 10 children, 7 males and 3 females, ages 30 to 60 months. And you can see the variation in their children's communication ability. And this was done during COVID, which all research has had some interesting effects. So we did have to do 60% of these on over Zoom, which, to be honest, that's something that we've integrated virtual sessions and protocols for how to do the ECI virtually. During the pandemic, we've got a study published in JEI about how that worked, and it worked really well. We're not seeing any differences in the growth of children who were getting ECIs virtually versus those who were getting them in person. And the satisfaction between the home visitors and the parents is pretty high, but when you ask them, would you rather do these virtually or in person, pretty much across the board, they're saying we'd rather do them in person, which is,
Sorry,
yeah,
did that make it harder to make sure you got all of the instances of vocalizations? Did you have microphones and things that you set up around the play area?
That's a really good question. And basically what we did was, if they had a smartphone, they could use their smartphone, and as long as somebody was there, keeping it within a couple of feet and moving as the child moved, because we have tried, wireless microphones, lapel mic, and they just ultimately get in the way. But yeah, it's a really good point. And we thought we thought we were going to see some decreases in communication, and if we did, it was going to be tough because we weren't going to know if that was an effect of the technology or if it was something else.
Did the technology distract the kiddos during the
Not
sessions?
really, not really. But more so kids with autism, though.
Yeah, I would bet.
That's right. Yeah, because you introduce more objects, and it's more opportunities for distraction.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest challenge was for parents who didn't have a cell phone data plan or a broadband internet connection, that we needed to bring a hotspot in. It was a pretty small percentage, smaller than what I was expecting, but the most recent estimates are about 92% of people have access to broadband, whether that's on the phone or computer. But there's still a lot of families out there who don't have that, and so that's probably the biggest challenge. But so we did have to do this virtually, which was kind of a problem, but really is kind of good because we're going to integrate that as something that will be used in the future. So now we have some protocols for how to do that. So they did 2 forms of the ECI, and the 2 forms, a form is just a toy set. So it's Fisher-Price barn or the Fisher-Price house. I'm going to show you those IJA probes in just a second. And then parents provided feedback about their satisfaction with it after each session. So this was the interesting part of this, I think, was what toys are going to elicit IJA and communication and are going to be easy for the parents to administer. So that's the other thing to think about with this, is that you've got a parent who has a child with autism, who has a toy set, and they're playing for 6 minutes during this assessment. And now what we're asking them to do is you're going to have a couple of toys, additional toys that you're going to need to bring out to try to elicit some initiated joint attention. And you can see the different types of toys that we've tried out. I highlighted the ones in red, which were ones that they didn't elicit any initiated joint attention across any of the children, but they were reported by the parents to be the most difficult to elicit. I was kind of excited about the remote control car, but that's really hard to get going. You got to get it out, you got to turn it on. There's a lot involved there. You've got 2 pieces. But so that one was not a good fit. So the bell bracelet was a little too subtle. The parent is playing with the child, but if the child's not looking at the bracelet, then it's not going to obviously elicit any joint attention. The sound tube was difficult for the parents, a little bit too long. But you can see some of the dirty truck had high satisfaction from the parents because it was easy to integrate into the toy set. We got some IJA and some communication, and the parents could do it with a reasonable amount of fidelity. Do you guys have any other suggestions for toys that you could think of that might be good for eliciting joint attention during this? Yeah.
The magnetiles.
The what?
Magnetiles. The magnetic tiles.
Oh yeah.
You can have them, and you can interact as they do any combination, and you can do colors or shapes, and so you have like more opportunities for verbalization. Right. And about how many? I mean, it sounds like you could probably vary the amount that you have because we don't want to have too many. But if there's a particular toy that they're fixated on,
yeah,
you could build a little house to put the toy in, and they would like that kind of thing because it mixes their original interest with a new interest.
I see. So you could actually kind of make it into something that maybe that child can.
I also have a lot of different sets that you can make one into a car. It comes with like little wheels, or they've got dinosaur ones.
Yeah.
That you can create too. So that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Any other suggestions, or what do you guys think? We're measuring joint attention here. We're trying to get, you can see the variation in the amount of IJA that we're getting. one of the things that we have to consider is that, maybe we're not getting much IJA because, children have autism in this group. And so we do need to be cognizant of that. But
Do you have norm reference data on this for like typically developing children?
no, we don't.
Right.
That's true. And the thing that we're just doing this for feasibility, making sure that it works, but we do want to be able to see growth over time. So we do want to see low levels that eventually grow as intervention is put in place. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought of something else too. Since you're dealing with kids maybe on the autism spectrum, you could appeal to the sensory section of whatever they're experiencing.
Yeah.
By using like kinetic sand is very like sensory, like satisfying to have that kind of thing. I mean, that could be a very persuasive toy for somebody on the autism spectrum with that particular sensory inclination.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, and yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say this on what you said, like it'd be interesting to know any like sensory patterns related to both kids with autism and without, because just like us, we prefer certain kids prefer the visual part or a noisy one or something that's touch, and it's like part of me, maybe that's me as an OT, but also just wondering if that would relate to the kind of toy they liked. And he said, oh, what other toys? I'm like, it's hard for me to say because it probably depends on the kid, right? And their sensory preferences.
That's right.
Right.
One kid's like one thing, and yeah, absolutely, it's very individual. And we've actually kind of thought about that too, is having maybe a little needs assessment that the parent fills out, so that we maybe can figure that out beforehand and make it more individualized. Yeah.
My grandson, they came in during COVID, he had the test. He's 3 now, it's about 2.5 when they did that. He always went for puzzles.
Yeah.
But he also had a very hard time because the person came in and wore masks. So he could not, and they were doing speech.
Right.
They kept the mask on, so
Right,
he didn't really gain a whole lot.
That makes it hard. Yeah, for sure.
The ones you did at home, did you use masks during COVID?
That was up to the parents.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
so
very.
that's right. Yeah, so this was, it wasn't at the height of the pandemic, so we did give them the option. And so yeah, it was about half and half mask versus non.
That time, they had to wear masks.
What's that?
When they came to see Jack,
Oh yeah,
there was
yeah,
no option.
yeah.
Ever.
And that was really just for the person who was videoing. So the parents did not wear masks with their child during when they were the play partner. And so what we're doing right now is pilot 2. And this is where we're really trying to figure out what is going to be best, the pre-post probes or the embedded probes. I've got the vibrating multisensory ball already in red because our last meeting, we've done it with 3 children now. All 3 of them, as soon as they turned it on, they ran out of the room immediately.
I used to use those all the time in my sessions. That's so funny. I had kids that loved that.
They loved it.
I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I haven't seen that in years.
Yeah, we use them with our kids. They loved it. But yeah, the 3 kids we've done this with so far. So I think we're going to take that one out. In terms of feasibility for doing the IJA probes with the ECI, it seems like it would be easier to do it pre-post. That's going to extend the length of the assessment though. So it's really important if we are able to embed those to make it a shorter assessment so that it's not extending it. But that's where we are right now, is really looking at the feasibility of this, and we are going to be recruiting for the validation study this summer. If you guys, there are flyers on the table out in the front. We're going to need a few hundred children. So
We have right now we're doing something with Child Start too. In Wichita, we have about 4 locations that we're helping with.
oh, cool. Okay.
And I was like, oh, and I wish Nikki is our BCAV, that she's the one helping with that. She would have loved this. So.
Yeah. we're paying families to participate. So if you guys want to take a flyer, if you've got families that might be interested, certainly do that. But that's where we are. And what questions do you guys have about the ECI in general or what we're doing? Yeah.
Earlier in the presentation, you mentioned the home visitors, who did either the one through the bottle or the one, where they self-suggested.
Yep.
I was just curious, were those home visitors all of the same discipline or background, or how what was?
It was early Head Start home visitors.
Okay, so they were kind of just in early ed, and that's it, in early education, like, do they have a specific?
Not necessarily. So early Head Start, they do have, so they all had bachelor's degrees,
Okay,
not necessarily in education, certainly not in early
Oh, okay.
education.
yeah,
But yeah, early Head Start does require a bachelor's degree.
okay. I was just curious.
And beyond that, that some of them had a CDA.
Okay,
They have to maintain, I think, about 15, 20 hours of CEUs.
got it.
But it's a really huge variation
Very
in
interesting.
skill sets.
I was just
And-
wondering if you guys thought, do you know what I mean, like, it just being a service provider, if you thought any of that influenced the outcomes, do you know what I mean, like the home visitor and how they were, even just interacting with the family.
Yeah, no, it's a great, and we actually did add that as a covariate. We didn't see any
Oh, cool.
differences
Yeah,
based on that. But I think maybe with a larger data set, we might be able to tease out some differences.
yeah, cool.
But yeah, it's a really good question because that's really kind of what the mod is designed to do, is to kind of, level the playing
Level
field,
it out,
so
yeah.
to speak, so
Right,
that,
that's
people
cool.
who have trouble looking at data, making decisions, not to mention, you've got this big manual, okay, what they typically do is just hand the manual to the parents and say, here's some strategies for
Right.
parents and for children.
Which would be, yeah, totally different than if they spend the time, right? Yeah,
Right.
okay, cool, thanks.
They have actually a different test in place that they do for verbal development and stuff that they're pushing out through the public school system. Have you thought about maybe working with that group and kind of seeing if you can maybe compare resources and see if that would widen your range, especially with programs that deal with kids who are 6 months to 3 years old?
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of community programs like that that are offered to communities for free. But the system that they're using is more of a wide range system. It's not just language, it's other things as well. But if you could narrow it down like you guys are doing, that could help families kind of figure out kind of the strategy of any particular direction they need to go in for resources for their child.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've worked with, parents as teachers. Is there, what was the name of the?
Well, that's what I was thinking, parents, teachers, and then there's a whole community of preschools that deal with children on the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
That would welcome additional resources, especially dealing with speech delay and stuff like that as well. And a lot of times their children are, the early learning ages
Right.
before they get into the public school system.
Well, there is, so Kansas has actually done a really cool thing. I don't know if you've heard of the block grant, that basically it provides, it takes money from tobacco taxes and it puts in, so any childcare program can apply for funds through the block grant. And in order to get those funds, they need to start collecting data on the children that they're serving. And the idea is that they use those data to inform what they're doing. It's a great program, but what ends up happening, what we see, because a lot of them use the ECI. The ECI is one of the measures that they can use for that. But what we often see is that if they're not using the mod, they're just collecting the data. Sometimes they'll even just contract out with somebody to come do the assessments for them, enter the data, and they never even actually see it. But that's the idea behind that and the intention is really good. And I'll put it on assessment developers and say, you need to make it easier, have some kind of a system so that people can use the data, because otherwise, yeah, people are just collecting data for the sake of collecting data. And because, their supervisor asked them to, or they need to get this funds. So,
That could actually be kind of like a direction.
Yeah.
like kind of like a guideline would be
Yeah.
easier, but I was thinking since you're mentioning the early testing, and I think you deal with the groups before they hit the public schools. So anybody under 5? Is that what it
well,
is?
42 months, 42 months.
42 months.
Yeah. After that, the MyIGDs, I don't know if you guys have heard of MyIGDs, they're pre-literacy measures. And so they connect well with with our infant toddler IGDs. But yeah, they go up to 42 months. Basically the time when children start receiving RD services.
We were actually in, my son is 4. We were actually in parents as teachers.
Oh, cool.
And they were actually unable to say the word autism.
Yeah.
Or to test directly. So they could only recommend that we follow through with additional testing, but they're unable to verbally say, "I suspect autism, maybe you should go for a diagnosis,"
But they couldn't even suggest you.
They couldn't even say the word autism. So I think
That's
it's,
interesting. Yeah. I wonder if that's a program specific thing, because the parents as teachers.
not just parents as teachers, but infant toddler services as well. So, Johnson County, yes. So if you have a chance to work with any of those groups, additionally, pushing this through and maybe having that on the mod as a possibility of diagnosis to go through it would be really helpful for the parents, because
Yeah.
even though we took the testing for the language delay and whatnot,
Yeah.
they were unable to recommend exactly what needed to be done afterwards.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's something we struggle with, because, and I didn't say this, but we really don't recommend using the ECI exclusively. You can use it as part of your diagnostic toolkit, but we don't just because it's so targeted. There needs to be some other clinical judgment, some other assessments.
But we had to use a variety of
Yeah.
different things just to get a referral from a pediatrician
Right.
who was unsure what she needed to do exactly to get that referral in points and space. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like there's some gaps
Right.
with the thing. So even though you're measuring like the language delay, I think that it sure would be great if there was kind of something additional,
Yeah.
kind of like another springboard to go to that can kind of help push the parents in, like, not necessarily just autism diagnosis, but just like in a direction of like language delay. Why don't you look at this
Yeah.
factor, something where they could just deal specifically with the pediatrician at that point for the referral to the proper places.
Well, and that is something we've heard from listeners and providers, is that a lot of times, it's kind of the opposite problem. They'll suggest to the parents and say, your child is linking up ways, X, Y, and Z. The parent says, well, their older sibling didn't talk until they were 3, and now fine. And so they often will use these graphs and say, okay, this is where your child is in language, and this is where they are expected to be, kind of like a height and weight chart. And so I do know that particularly early at START, they have seen some benefits in using the graphs for that purpose specifically.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is tough. Can't make that referral or give you some specific recommendations.
But it's definitely appreciated to have something that measures a baseline so that you have something to do.
Questions?
Yeah. Can I make a comment on that?
Please do. Yeah.
Okay. I work in a clinic. I work with the doctors. And one of my functions is maybe evaluations, the development evaluations. And when a child is some developmental delay, what doctors do is refer to infant and toddlers. Okay. Infant and Toddlers is a federal program that all childs have the right to have it and it's free. Okay? A lot of parents doesn't know that. Then, if the child is diagnostic, most of the time, doctors send to Infant and Toddlers or KU or Children's Mercy for an evaluation of any kind of delay. Newborn to 22 years old. Okay? At 33 months, if the child qualifies any kind, language, motor, any kind of development, if the child needs more help after the 3 years old, Infant and Toddlers at 33 months make an evaluation with you, mom, okay? And then they say, your child is, as he mentioned, your child is in this place. The Infant and Toddler programs give that choice to the parent to say, do you think that your child is fine or you want to continue with the program? If the parents say, yes, I want to continue, they may be transferred to para B or C, something like that. Yeah.
And on
And-
the HC removal.
Yeah. When they do the transfer, automatically go to Head Start to get therapy. Okay? This is in Kansas City, Wyandotte County.
And Head Start does have, they've got financial requirements too. You have
Yeah.
to be
Of course,
certain.
you need to apply, depends on your income. This is the reason I'm talking about. It's something that I learned basically. Because I work in Wyandotte County, these services, we can say, if you prove your income, you qualify, you're gonna be free. If you live in Johnson County, you live in Overland Park, you live in Miriam, those service gonna score you, you're gonna apply, you're gonna see your income, and you're gonna have to pay certain amount. Okay? At 33 months, they give you the choice. You wanna continue with the program, you think your child is fine or not. Sometimes, as you mentioned, some parents say, I think my child is fine, I think that doesn't need any more. I don't want any more services. Then they take out the program. Okay? And then when they enter a preschool, if the child is on target, good, we're happy. If the child is not good, what's going to happen? They're gonna reevaluate again, and they're gonna see like another delay, and they need to work again with the child. But a lot of parents doesn't know, they don't know that you can say yes, continue with the therapy or not. And I've been here in this field for a long time. I was a parent educator. And I went to the clinics and I worked directly with the doctors. And now I was a home visitor and I knew, I identified, okay, the child we need to, refer to the doctor when they have some kind of delay. Because parents and speech is a visitor program that helps you to see the child is going. Then when I start working in the clinic, I see the other side. Okay? I've been there for 13 years. And parents tell me, I learn from them a lot. And this sometimes the programs too tell me, this is the reason sometimes I say parents, if you see, and it's sad sometimes when parents see something, the denial, my child is fine, my child doesn't have anything, my child is fine. After 1-2 years, they start noticing that, and I say, thank you, God, they want the help. But when they are 4-5 years old, and they come back, do you remember you told me, can you help me now? Yeah, I can help you, but we wish to catch on time. You know what I mean? Start working since infants, as you mentioned, 6 months, we already
Early
starting
as
that.
possible, yeah.
We starting that.
And that kind of goes back, that's being able to keep good records and data in
Exactly.
some,
Exactly.
centralized place. So that you
Exactly.
can keep that. But thank you for your perspective.
I just want to,
That's-
because you mentioned the doctor doesn't know any information about that. Probably you need to change.
I'm familiar with the process.
Yeah.
So when we brought it up, we had to all look it up to figure out what the process was to get the referral, to get the diagnosis. but the fact that